Today we venture into the hidden shadows of what seemed like a normal suburban marriage, where the secrets shared between a young wife and her much older gynecologist led to a tragic, fatal conclusion. How does an illicit affair, steeped in manipulation and fear, devolve into blackmail and ultimately cold-blooded murder? Lily Evans had always been known as the quiet one. Raised in a small town in Nebraska as the middle child in a family of 5, her siblings were always in the spotlight, outgoing, successful, and the embodiment of everything her parents admired. Her father, Peter Evans, a strict and no-nonsense factory manager, placed great value on hard work and achievement. Her brothers, both athletes, basked in the praise and attention she never received. Lily, on the other hand, was shy and introverted, often relegated to the shadows of her siblings' accomplishments. Her mother, Susan, though kind-hearted, rarely stood up to Peter, leaving Lily to contend with her feelings of neglect all on her own. As Lily grew older, this unmet need for attention became a deeply ingrained part of her personality. She excelled academically, though in a quiet, understated way that made her achievements easy to overlook. While her brothers were celebrated for their sports victories in high school, Lily quietly graduated with honors, her achievements going largely unnoticed. She found a sense of refuge working part-time at a local cafe after school, though she often felt invisible behind the counter. By the time she graduated in 2005, Lily had become accustomed to blending into the background. Soft-spoken and frequently overlooked, she sought solace in her own quiet world. Friends came and went, but none stayed for long. She longed for someone who would truly notice her, who could see beyond her reserved demeanor and appreciate her for who she was. This deep-seated desire for validation would later play a significant role in shaping many of her future relationships. In 2007, during a shift at the cafe, Lily met Chris Evans. He was everything she wasn't: outgoing, ambitious, and charismatic. He saw her in a way no one else had before. Their first conversation occurred when Chris stopped in for coffee while on a business trip. He was immediately drawn to her, and for the first time in her life, Lily felt truly seen. They quickly became inseparable. Chris adored Lily's calm and nurturing personality, while she reveled in the way he made her feel important and valued. By early 2008, to the surprise of their families, they were married. Chris was always supportive, constantly encouraging Lily to pursue what made her happy. At the same time, he had just launched a promising career as a sales manager, with his future looking bright. Meanwhile, Lily had dropped out of community college, unsure of what she truly wanted in life. Her enthusiasm for her studies had waned as she focused more on building a life with Chris. By the latter half of 2008, they had moved into a modest home in their small Nebraska town. Shortly after, Lily discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and anxiety. While excited about the prospect of motherhood, she was also uncertain about whether she was ready. Having always struggled with self-confidence, the idea of raising a child without the emotional support she had missed in her own upbringing triggered her deepest insecurities. Could she truly be a good mother? Could she provide the love and stability she had always longed for but never fully received? Chris, on the other hand, was overjoyed about the baby, and his excitement helped alleviate some of her doubts. Yet, deep within, Lily still couldn't shake the persistent need for reassurance, for someone to fill the emotional void left by her distant upbringing. In early 2010, as her pregnancy progressed, Lily Evans was referred to Dr. Benson, a renowned and highly respected gynecologist. At 46, Dr. Benson had earned a stellar reputation as one of the best in the region, with decades of experience to his name. He was known for his professionalism and the compassionate care he offered to all his patients. On the morning of September 3, 2011, however, everything changed. Lily disappeared. Her husband, Chris, reported her missing after she failed to return from what he assumed was a routine checkup. Little did he know that visit would be anything but routine. Later that night, police were summoned to Dr. Benson's clinic after a cleaner made a horrifying discovery: Lily's lifeless body. She had been strangled with a leather belt and hidden carefully in a back storage room, the door locked. The scene was unsettling in its precision. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses. It was evident that Dr. Benson had meticulously planned every detail of the murder. Despite his esteemed standing, a closer look into Dr. Benson's life exposed something far more sinister. While outwardly a respected figure in the community, behind the facade of a family man was a deeply insecure individual who had developed a dangerous obsession with his younger patient, Lily. She had unwittingly become the object of his fixation. By the end of 2010, Lily's life had begun to spiral in ways she could never have anticipated. What started as routine medical appointments slowly morphed into something far more sinister, something that weighed heavily on her. Dr. Benson's role in her life shifted from being her gynecologist to someone who exerted an unsettling control over her. Their affair developed gradually, starting with long, seemingly innocent conversations during her appointments. He asked deeply personal questions, about her childhood, her marriage, and her anxieties about motherhood. With each question, Lily felt increasingly exposed, more vulnerable than she had ever been with anyone before. Dr. Benson approached her cautiously. In the early months, he never pushed too far, never crossed a line that made her uncomfortable. Yet there was always an underlying tension in his tone. Lily couldn't help but be drawn to the attention he gave her, the attention she had been longing for. Over time, the lines blurred until they disappeared entirely. What began as harmless flirtation evolved into a dangerous escape from her quiet, unremarkable life. She convinced herself it was temporary, just a phase, something she would move past. But by November 2010, the reality was undeniable. Secret late-night meetings had begun. After the clinic closed and the staff had left, Dr. Benson would lock the doors, shut off the cameras, and tell her whatever she needed to hear to keep her coming back. Lily hated to admit it, but part of her craved those encounters. He made her feel alive, seen, and special in ways that no one else, not even Chris, ever had. But the guilt soon started eating away at her. Chris remained the loving, dedicated husband he had always been, working tirelessly to secure their family's future. Meanwhile, Lily was suffocating under the weight of her deceit. Every time she saw Chris, the guilt gnawed at her, and the burden of her shame grew heavier. She told herself repeatedly that she needed to end the affair, that she couldn't continue down this destructive path. But every time she tried to pull away, Dr. Benson found new ways to keep her entangled in his grip. By December 2010, Lily had attempted to end her affair with Dr. Benson several times. She told him it had to stop, that she couldn't continue deceiving her husband, Chris. But Dr. Benson wasn't the kind of man who took rejection lightly. He had grown accustomed to the control he wielded over Lily, and the idea of losing her wasn't something he was willing to accept. His attitude shifted during their conversations. The once kind, understanding doctor turned cold and calculated. He reminded her of the messages they had exchanged, the intimate moments they had shared in secret. It was no longer just about the affair, it was about power. Dr. Benson knew exactly how to exploit her deepest insecurities. He made it clear that with one word, he could destroy her life. If Chris found out, everything she had built would crumble. The thought of losing her marriage and everything she cared about terrified Lily, and Dr. Benson was well aware of that. Initially, his threats were subtle, but they soon became more direct. He warned her that if she tried to leave him, he could ruin her marriage with a single message to Chris. Lily's anxiety escalated with each passing day. By late December, the weight of her situation had become unbearable. She spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. What had once seemed like a thrilling escape from her ordinary life had turned into a suffocating trap, and she felt helpless to escape it. Every time she returned to Dr. Benson's office, she felt her grip on her life slipping further away. His once charming smile and soft words now felt like chains, binding her to him. She was no longer in control, he was. With her baby due in a few months, Lily became desperate to break free before it was too late. But each attempt to end things only made the situation worse. Dr. Benson would remind her of the incriminating evidence he had, photos, messages, and under the pressure she would cave. How could she confess to Chris, the man who had given her everything, that she had been unfaithful? The thought of breaking his heart was unbearable. She felt trapped, consumed by fear, weighed down by the secrecy and lies. It was all too much for her to handle. By early February 2011, Lily had reached her breaking point. The guilt had become unbearable, and she knew she couldn't continue living like this. She had tried countless times to end it quietly without confrontation, but Dr. Benson refused to let her go. He wanted to keep her under his control, and as long as he had power over her, there was no escape. On the afternoon of February 3, 2011, Lily made a final decision. She couldn't continue living in fear. She had to confront him and end things once and for all. If he refused, she would confess everything to Chris regardless of the consequences. She couldn't keep living in constant dread, waiting for her lies to catch up with her. That evening, as she walked into the clinic, the nervous excitement she had once felt at the start of their affair was gone. In its place was a cold determination. She had to take back control, even if it meant risking everything. But as she stepped into Dr. Benson's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. He sensed that something was different. Lily was no longer the timid woman he had manipulated for months. She confronted him, telling him it had to end, that she would confess everything to Chris if he didn't let her go. She laid all her cards on the table, unaware of how far he was willing to go to protect his secret. Dr. Benson's reaction was nothing short of chilling. His expression shifted from shock to something far more sinister. He was a man cornered, faced with a choice. Would he let Lily go and risk losing everything? Or would he take drastic measures to ensure his secret remained hidden? As February turned into March, the tension between Lily and Dr. Benson intensified. Lily had no idea of the dark thoughts consuming him, no clue just how far he was prepared to go to maintain his control over her. What had once been a thrilling, forbidden affair had now become a ticking time bomb, ready to detonate at any moment. Lily was no longer just a woman trapped in a poor decision. She was caught in a nightmare with no clear escape. Their confrontation had set something in motion, something that would alter both of their lives forever. On the morning of September 3, 2011, the quiet routine of their Nebraska town was shattered. Lily Evans, who had left for what her husband Chris assumed was a routine checkup with Dr. Benson, never came home. Chris, who had always trusted the doctor to care for his wife and their unborn child, grew increasingly anxious as the hours ticked by. By the afternoon, his concern had escalated into full-blown panic. Lily never stayed out without telling him where she was, and he knew something was terribly wrong. Desperate, Chris called the clinic, hoping to hear that Lily had simply stayed late due to a complication or an extended conversation with the doctor. But no one had seen or heard from Lily since her appointment earlier that morning. The clinic staff was as clueless about her whereabouts as Chris was. By that evening, overwhelmed with dread, Chris reported Lily missing to the police. What followed would uncover a horrifying truth. Later that night, around 9 p.m., a cleaner at Dr. Benson's clinic was finishing her usual after-hours duties. As she moved through the rooms, wiping down surfaces and tidying chairs, she noticed an odd smell coming from the back storage room, an area that was rarely used. Feeling uneasy, she opened the door. What she found inside would haunt her for the rest of her life. Hidden behind a pile of medical supplies was Lily's lifeless body. She had been strangled with a leather belt, and her body had been carefully positioned, as though Dr. Benson had gone to great lengths to conceal her. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence that Lily had fought back. The scene was disturbingly precise, meticulously planned, as if Dr. Benson had thought through every detail to avoid suspicion. From the moment the police arrived, it was evident that this was no crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated murder. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town. No one could believe that a trusted doctor, a man who had served the community for so many years, could be capable of such a monstrous act. Dr. Benson had always been regarded as a model professional, someone people turned to in their most vulnerable moments, especially women like Lily who had depended on him during one of the most delicate times in her life. But as investigators dug deeper into Dr. Benson's personal life, they uncovered a terrifying reality. The respectable image he had carefully cultivated over the years was nothing more than a facade, hiding a far darker truth. On September 5, 2011, police brought Dr. Benson in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He insisted that he had seen Lily earlier that day for a routine checkup and that she had left the clinic shortly afterward. But as investigators continued to press him, cracks began to appear in his story. He couldn't explain why Lily's car was still parked at the clinic or why her phone last pinged near the office at the time she was supposed to have left. By September 10, forensic investigators uncovered the evidence that would ultimately seal Dr. Benson's fate. Lily's DNA was found on the belt used to strangle her, and security footage from nearby cameras showed her entering the clinic but never leaving. It became evident that Dr. Benson hadn't just killed Lily, he had carefully orchestrated every detail of her murder. As the investigation progressed, even more disturbing revelations surfaced. Several former patients came forward with stories of inappropriate comments, lingering touches, and unwanted advances. While these encounters hadn't escalated to the same level as Lily's relationship with Dr. Benson, they painted a troubling picture of a man who had been crossing professional boundaries for years. It became clear that Dr. Benson had been using his position of power to manipulate vulnerable women, all while maintaining an outward appearance of professionalism. Lily was just one of many targets, but unlike the others, she had tried to break free. When she threatened to reveal the truth, Dr. Benson's obsessive need for control pushed him to commit the ultimate act of violence. He couldn't let Lily tell her husband or risk the collapse of his entire career. In his twisted mind, silencing her was his only option. As the case against Dr. Benson grew stronger, the town was gripped by a mix of disbelief and fear. How had no one noticed the darkness lurking beneath his calm demeanor? How many other women had suffered in silence, too afraid to speak up? By September 15, the evidence was overwhelming. Police formally arrested Dr. Benson, leaving the community reeling from the horrifying realization that one of their most respected citizens had been living a double life. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues were in shock as the story dominated the media. This wasn't just about Lily's murder. It was about years of hidden desires and the slow unraveling of a man who had spent his life shrouded in secrets and manipulation. The trial, which began in early 2012, became a spectacle that captured the attention not only of the small Nebraska town but of the entire nation. Dr. Benson's defense team argued that his relationship with Lily had been consensual and that she had become emotionally unstable, threatening to ruin his life. They claimed that her erratic behavior had forced him to act in self-defense. However, the prosecution built a far more compelling case. They depicted Dr. Benson as a man consumed by obsession, someone who had systematically preyed on vulnerable women, and when he faced the loss of control over Lily, he resorted to murder. The most damning evidence came from the forensic experts. The precision with which Lily had been strangled, the careful way her body had been hidden, and the lack of defensive wounds all pointed to a premeditated crime. Dr. Benson hadn't acted out of fear or panic. He had planned Lily's murder the moment she threatened to confess to her husband. On April 10, 2012, after just 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Dr. Harold Benson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell into silence as the judge handed down the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Chris, Lily's family, and the community, the verdict brought a sense of justice, though it could never bring back the woman whose life had been tragically cut short by the man she had once trusted. Dr. Benson's fall from grace was swift and irreversible. A man once regarded as a compassionate and trusted doctor was now a convicted murderer, his name forever linked to the dark secrets he had fought so hard to keep hidden. Yet, for those who had known Lily, especially for Chris, the pain of losing her would never fully heal. The trial had exposed the extent of Dr. Benson's obsession, but it also left behind many unanswered questions. How many other lives had been impacted by his actions? How many more secrets lay buried in the past, still unrevealed? In the end, Lily Evans's murder served as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the most trusted of faces. As Dr. Benson began his life behind bars, the small town was left to pick up the pieces, haunted by the memory of a woman whose life had been stolen by a man who had once vowed to care for her. Yet many were left wondering, was this truly the whole story? Could a seemingly dedicated doctor really transform into a cold-blooded murderer? Lily's story stood as a tragic reminder that even those we trust most may harbor the darkest of secrets.